Record. Hey everybody. We're having a little technical difficulties today, so there will be no guitar, unfortunately. And but we're just starting to get rolling here. And it is August what?
22nd.
August 22nd. That's crazy. Hey, links mode disabled. All right, let me turn the chat, get the chat room working. Allow links. And we'll see who's on. Yeah, since I didn't promote it, we got a little smaller crowd today. But, so you guys all know my good friend, Mr. Miles Rose. Miles, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dan.
Good to have you, as always. And we're going to kind of go over some tube issues. Hey, good evening, Knut. I hope things are well in Norway. Let's see if I can make this big. No, it doesn't work. It's a flash thing.
I see Steve's out there.
Hi, Steve Kirk. How's your new amp? Oh, it's on the way. You getting it today? Yeah? Maybe. Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe.
So the camera angle's a little weird today, so you're going to see us pop in and out. And it's just a total hodgepodge show. That's right. So yeah, I'm having problems with my board, and I couldn't get Ustream to recognize it. So I'm just using the internal mic, or the mic that's on the camera that I have. Hey Frank, how are you? Frank Schotterford. How's it going? Did you guys sign the chassis? I better make sure I did.
Oh, I don't think so.
I signed a bunch. I don't know if I signed yours or not. I don't know.
You'll have to bring it back down here and have all.
When you come to visit, we'll sign it all. God, I swore I signed it, but maybe not.
No, you signed.
I signed a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And I think they were in such a hurry they didn't wait for me. And they might not have known. Oh, crud. That sucks.
Actually, to Steve and everybody else, Steve, your amp went out with the Ruby EL34B STR output tube, which is a really, really great tube. A number of years ago, I did a write-up on that is somewhere on the Guitar Amplifier Blueprinting website. And Tom McNeil of Ruby Tubes asked if he could copy and reproduce what I wrote on that tube. And I said, sure. They ended up putting that in their annual catalog at the beginning of the catalog, and at that time I was working for Groove Tubes, and Aspen Pittman went ballistic because at the NAMM show that write-up was there about how good that tube was. Bottom line is that's a really great tube. The guys over here did a lot of experimentation with various tubes, and Mike and Dan ended up liking that tube the most. But the winged C's that you got from, I think, Mike at KCA or Doug Preston, I don't remember who. If you go back and forth, they're going to be different. It's going to be a personal preference.
Yeah, they're not drastically different. I was kind of surprised when we dug through all the EL34s. Some are a little better, some are a little worse. You know, they were all kind of the same. I didn't see a huge difference like you do with EL84s or 66s. You know, the different manufacturer of those tubes are wildly different.
But then again, you were comparing what you thought were the good EL34s. You didn't test any of the crappy ones.
Well, yeah, we had some crappy ones around, but I bought like the Wing C's and the Svetlanas, the JJs, New Sensor, and something else. And we ended up going with that special run tube. I forgot what's it called?
It's the EL34B STR. And then they also have the HT, the high voltage. One.
Very good. Oh, thanks, Josh. Yeah, my birthday was Sunday, and thank you guys for all the nice messages I got. I was pretty overwhelmed. Ah, here's a guy from Presonus calling. That's pretty funny. Hey, Rick, how you doing? Oh.
You get.
Oh yeah. You know what? I'm good, man. I already started my show. So can I call you back when I'm finished, and we'll fix it all. Okay. Okay. That's great. I appreciate it, man. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Bye bye. So Steve, you say is the microphone too hot? Is it distorting? Maybe because I can see we're pushing the meter pretty hard here. Okay. Let me cool it off. How about that? Is that better? Or is it not loud enough? Norwegian slow-mo. Or northern slow-mo. Good. Is it still loud enough for you guys to hear? Yeah? Maybe? Good. All is good, sir. So, let's see. What's going on in the world here at 65? So we're playing with a new prototype. And I'm very happy with it. And we're doing the same thing with that we did with the producer, in that it's high current, low voltage kind of setup. So, when we did it with EL34s, we discovered that there's this really cool clean sound with EL34s that I hadn't really heard before. But now, sort of the opposite with the 6L6s, we're discovering that there's distortion. It's great. And I personally hate 6L6 distortion. There's the odd amp where someone always go, what about the whatever? I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but usually when you put it side by side with an EL34 amp, the distortion's better.
Well, most 6L6 distortion amps that are known for distortion, the front end has really colored it. Examples are like a Soldano SLO, Mesa Boogie rectifier.
They have very unique front ends.
Yeah, PV5150. But Dan managed to get the aggressive lower mids, when you really have that hit you in the gut sound.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah, coming out of his Marshall, one of his Marshall 412 cabinets, it's pretty darn impressive. But it can still do really nice cleans. So
yeah, it's more of a vintage kind of. I guess you can get the sort of blackfacey cleans out of it, but when you push it, it sounds very bassman showman-like kind of sound.
Yeah, like when it's pushed. Those amps are pushed.
And then, but a little more elevated. It's kind of evolved past that, but it's sort of reminiscent of that. It's not really, the circuit's not a clone of that by any means. But, so I'm really excited about it, and so far the tubes seem to be lasting. And, tubes are so happy with no voltage on them. So, and it's kind of funny, which is a whole topic of discussion, because Miles was, I think maybe about 10 years ago, you were the first person to say to me, tubes hate voltage and love current. Now, really? I didn't know that. And you're like, yeah, it's kind of the opposite of how people make things. People make things with high voltage and low current. And I found out the reason why is that the power transformers are a lot cheaper to make. It's easier to produce voltage.
Step up voltage rather than supply current. And you look at the old, the really great sounding, well, it's a personal opinion, but I feel the really great sounding Marshalls were the ones that were at 390 to 430 or so volts.
My 71 out here is 380.
Yeah, not the ones later on where they were doing 550 and 600, where they ended up getting huge, very high wattage. But
right.
what happens today?
Hey, Bill Studio, we see you, buddy.
More than anywhere else. Recently, there's been a number of amps that have come into 65 amps to be refreshed and just gone over, folks that are on tour. You saw Jared Scharf here a couple weeks ago. His amp was in here. And when an amp comes in, we go through all the tubes and we measure all the tubes to see how things have changed in the time that the amp has been out there on the road. What kind of degradation there has been on the tubes, because all of these things get measured prior to the amp being sent out to the shop, to the store. And there's a database of all of this stuff. So these amps come in, I was looking at this stuff, and the amount of degradation of modern tubes, it's getting worse and worse. Tubes are degrading at an ever-increasing rate. And the other day, Mike Francis Cheney over here had an issue with something and he wanted me to look at a couple of the tubes. And I found one of them had a gas short that I showed him. I showed him while it was happening in progress, and explained to him and some of the folks over here, showed them this is what happens with today's tubes. They appear to work fine. After the tube gets hot and it's been worked a little while, all of a sudden the tube kind of goes away, and you'll see that more today than ever before. If you look inside of a tube where it has vents in the plate, like a 6L6 or an EL34, where it has a cut where you can actually look into the tube and see that glowing orange cathode material. If you look at old tubes, that'll be an all nice solid orange or red hot glowing piece, and that is the cathode. If you look in modern tubes, you'll see that same piece, but you'll see glowing pieces of purple and magenta and other colors. Those are impurities that are in that cathode material, and you find that in new tubes today. And what happens is when those impurities are heated up, they emit a gas, and that gas and those contaminants.
Just like a human being.
Exactly.
When you put impurities in your body, you emit a gas.
I mean, after this, we'll probably go to the Blue Mexican restaurant, and
I will put some impurities in my body.
And
I might emit some gas after that.
But basically what happens is that gas is conductive, and you will end up with a gas short, and the tube will.
And I am wearing
fail.
shorts today. So is that too easy? Sorry. That's really bad.
But
well, very fine. So one of the things I always like to, we talk about a lot on the show is we're trying to design a little differently here, because we've got tube issues in 3 or 4 different layers that cause problems for us. One of which is there's only a few tubes these days that are reliable at sort of standard voltages. And the only 2 that I found that can really take voltage endlessly on similar scale as an old tube are EL84s and 6V6s. And those are the ones from JJ. And then for 6L6s and EL34s, they just don't take voltage anymore. And, I talked about this before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating it too much, but it became apparent to me that the current paradigm of amp designing is going to go away. I can see the writing on the wall. We get enough tubes in here, and thanks to Miles, we get a lot of data on the tubes. And I think that's what's been missing, is no one's really keeping track of the data, of what's going on. No one's trending the tubes for you statisticians out there. So we've tried to, in a small scale, try to trend the tubes. Miles keeps spreadsheets, and of course there's a lot of, we talk about tubes all the time here. But they're just getting worse and worse, and it's not like a nosedive. I mean, they're going to work for a while. But every year we have a little more fallout. Every year there's a little less tolerance for voltage. Every year there's more impurities, like Miles was talking about. And so it became apparent that, well, maybe time to go solid state. Yeah, they tried that in the late 60s. I don't know how it turned out. But we're going to have to design differently. And even a couple of my old amps that I have here, like my Super Lead, which got sold, unfortunately, but I couldn't put modern tubes in it. I had a 69 Super Lead, and I had to go get a power transformer from Mercury that was 100 volts cooler than the original one. So I couldn't put any tubes in it, except for, vintage Mullards. So I took the B plus from 530 to 430. And then it still was kind of stressing out modern tubes. They still weren't happy. Mullards, of course, don't care. But, so, with the help of mercury magnetics and a little bit of cocktail napkin math, we started figuring out that why don't we flood these tubes with current and not hammer them with voltage. And so, I don't know, a lot of you guys maybe don't understand. Sometimes people get mixed up on what voltage and current is. And I'll give you my analogy. Miles can give you a more scientific one, but I always think of electricity moves and has a lot of the dynamics like water. And so voltage is the pressure on the electricity. So it's like, the PSI on your hose, how fast does the water come out? So an example of a high pressure, low current, so high voltage, low current in water analogies is the power washer you use to clean your driveway. It's not very much water going in there, but it's coming out at 1,800 pounds per square inch. A lot of pressure. That's why you have to have a metal tube instead of a hose, and you get that fine spray. Then you look at something like a fire hose, which is heavy diameter. That's just a ton of water coming out. Not near the pressure that's on a power washer. It's probably half the pressure. But it's 5 times the amount of water, 10 times, 100 times the amount of water. So tubes don't like to have the electricity forced on them that hard. That's what makes, the cathode material start to degrade fast. That's what any physical defects in the tube start to come out under that much pressure. So you can alternate the word pressure for voltage. In my mind, that's the way I think about it. And then, with current, think of water current. Same thing, electrical current, water current. It's almost interchangeable. So the tubes the more current you give it, the more water, the more fuel you give it, the better it performs. It works great. And the tubes are happy and they don't get hot because it's not under pressure.
I think your analogy is a really good one. One that, and I hadn't heard that one before, but that's a really cool one.
That's how I rationalize it. It's
the analogy I always used is, torque and horsepower. A lot of these cars today, you can look at a Lexus IS 350 or something, and it might have, 300 horsepower, the Mercedes, whatever, at 400 or 500 horsepower. There's 500 horsepower at 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, and you get a certain kind of feeling. But if you're as old as I am, and you remember things like 427 Corvettes that maybe only had 400 horsepower, but they had 500 foot-pounds of torque, that torque is what pushed you into the back of the seat, not the horsepower.
Right.
And the same kind of thing. Voltage breaks things down. If Rick Benson or Patrick from Mercury, the folks that I worked with over at Groove Tubes, there was a tube we had called the 6CA7. It was a reissue of the General Electric 6CA7 big bottle high vacuum tube. And at the end of its production run, if I put that tube on 350 volts, it would fail in under 5 minutes. At 250 volts, it would fail in 15 minutes. But that was a great example of a poorly made tube with a lot of impurities, where higher voltage gasified those impurities more quickly and the tube shorted out.
Do you think that pressure analogy is,
I think that's a really good analogy.
The pressure is what's degrading the thing that's just not made as sturdily as it was 40, 50 years ago. And you put that much pressure on those elements,
something breaks.
They break down fast.
Yeah, which I think is why I like your analogy more than my torque horsepower, because yours is directly attributed, applicable to saying, and now we have leaks.
Yeah, that's right.
Look how much rain comes out of the sky when it rains on your house, but it doesn't come through your roof and flood your living room.
Yeah, but the thing, so when you study basic electronics, you guys have probably heard of a thing called Ohm's law, and basically what Ohm's law states, and if you use the water analogy, it kind of carries out. If you raise the voltage on something, you don't need as much current to get the same throughput. So it has a reciprocal relationship. They almost sort of seesaw back and forth.
Which is called Boyle's law when it comes to fluid and hydraulics.
That's right.
It's the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So, if you drop the voltage on your amp and don't increase the available electricity on it, there's not enough pressure to feed that much juice through anymore. And so just like a fire hose, if you took the amount of water that's going through your garden, the thing you wash your back porch off with, and drop the amount of pressure on it, it's just going to dribble out. The only way to get more water to come out is to add more water, increase the diameter of that tube, and then there'll be more water coming out. And it's the same thing. You go the reverse and do the fire hose, which has huge capacity for water, and you don't need a lot of pressure on that to get a crap load of water to come out of it. What you need is all that water, just the natural inertia of all that water coming out. And so what we've seen a lot of guys do is go, well, okay, tubes don't like voltage, so I'm just going to design an amp that's a low voltage amp. And they don't adjust the current. I haven't seen anyone adjust the current. The only person I know that did that a little bit was Ken Fisher. And that's something I learned from looking at the transformer knowledge I have of train wrecks. He upped the current on it because most of his amps were not high voltage. They were, the train wreck Express is 350 or 360. And it's a little higher current than a Marshall is. And so then I said, I call up the transformer companies. Hey, I want to make this transformer, but I want to have 4 amps of current on it and this much voltage. And they went, that's going to cost money. I'm like, really? Why? What's the difference? He goes, I can squeeze voltage out of anything. Just increasing the pressure is not a big deal. You want more electricity, you're talking about more steel and more copper.
I mean, if you look at the economics, you guys have seen tube effects pedals that have a tube in it. Well, a tube requires at least 90 or so plate volts to run. Yet these pedals are coming off of a 12-volt wall wart. Well, where do you get that 90 or 100 or 150 volts?
Little transformer.
Cheap little step-up transformer.
Yeah.
They don't require a lot of current. When you require current, if you look at the transformer set in a producer, the thing's huge. The stack on that transformer is just massive. It's what you'd find in a 100-watt amp.
So a lot of people have asked why the producer costs as much as it does.
Because it has $400 worth of transformers.
Yeah, the transformer set alone costs more than most boutique amps cost just to make. So Mercury does like us for a couple reasons. Thanks, Bill. One of which is we don't copy things, and they kind of dig that, and they mention that to us a lot. I'm like, you guys are fun. You take chances and do these things. And then the other thing is we buy a lot of expensive transformers from them. But so then it just quickly became apparent as a manufacturer, I immediately went, if I'm Jim Marshall or Leo Fender and my artists are saying I need this amp to be louder, the quick and dirty way to do it is to just put more voltage on the tubes. It's cheaper than adding more tubes, and it's cheaper than doing all these sorts of things. There are a few exceptions to that rule. You look at like an Ampeg SVT, it's high voltage with 6 tubes in it. It's 300 watts. But that's why they're so expensive and so heavy. So we kind of went down this road with 6L6s this time, and a lot of you guys that know me know that I hate 6L6s. Mainly because I judge an amp on its distortion qualities. If it's got a good clean sound to me, that's just bonus. I don't care. I can get a clean sound out of a diesel. You roll your guitar back and play soft. I can get a clean sound. I want to know how it breaks up. I want to know how it sings.
Just a point of interest, this is one of the places where Dan and I disagree.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying this is a personal preference. It has no bearing on anyone else or anything else. It's just me. That's when I plug into an amp, I go, yeah, whatever. I want to hear it break up. And I appreciate a good clean sound, but it's not one of the reasons I buy an amp. And so I've always appreciated a 6L6 clean sound, even though I kind of like a 66 clean sound a little more. But I hate the distortion on 6. They're just ratty. There's something non-musical going on there, and it bothers me. I think I'm a little neurotic, because my brain tends to run on my ears, and I tend to notice things that most people consider me, neurotically picky about. But the amp can be just fantastic. But if I hear one little tiny thing that's pissing me off, I go, I hate it. I'm the guy that says, do you hear the clock ticking? And everyone goes, no. Wait a minute. Yes. Now I hear nothing but the clock. So when I hear a lot of amps, it's like, don't you hear that crossover distortion? That zzz on the top. And no, I never noticed it before. I've been playing this amp for 15 years, but now I can't stand it. And so 6L6s always did that. So the big surprise, when we did the EL34s on the producer was, wow, there's a good clean sound in these tubes. I've never heard an EL34 amp that had a really sweet clean sound. I mean, you can get a good clean sound out of Marshalls, but
of course, sitting behind Dan that you can't see.
Yeah, well, it's a Dynaco.
Right. He has some Dynaco hi-fi amps, that are EL34s. It's
the voltage is 280 on those or something.
How the tube is implemented, it's not the sound of the tube.
Bingo! You're one step ahead of me. So what quickly occurred to me was, all right, you take the pressure off the tube. You reduce the voltage. We're not just slamming it. And then you feed it twice as much, just clean AC, because these transformers give you so much AC that it's really clean and stable and smooth AC. We notice like the filtering requirements are way less now because the AC is so clean that we got this great clean sound out of it. But the same thing happened on the 6L6. Like, we made the amp, and I assumed the clean sound was going to be pretty good, but I went in there with the presumption that I was going to do a lot of work on the dirty sound to get it to be good. Dirty sound was killer right out of the box. I mean, I haven't changed the dirty side yet, and it rocks. We're all just kind of like, and we're a little jaded here, so when we play something and we like it, we all kind of reserve judgment until we play it again tomorrow or next week, and we'll intentionally just let something sit on the shelf and go, some days your ears are different. Maybe, how can a 6L6 do that?
Well, and then Dan also brings in people like you've maybe seen, it's like Jared was playing the amp and Angela Grant came in, she's like a hard rocker. People from various generations, from people as old as I am to people that are like 1/3 my age.
Yeah, we've played rockers. This for about 5 or 6 people now. And
yeah.
They've all kind of went, wow, holy shit, this thing throws a wide net. And so, you're getting a sneak preview into where we're going with our design strategy here because, I want to try to make amps that are going to last you guys. Hey, Tony Conley. I want to build you something that you can give to your kids. It's going to last. We put a lifetime warranty on it. And my only I don't warranty the tubes because that would be just insane. Unless you guys want to pay $10,000 for an amp, then I'll warranty your tubes for life.
Service contract.
I know, you just pay for all your tubes up front.
$500 a month.
Yeah, you just pay for all the tubes up front. Sure, you're paying for your amp and 25 more sets of tubes. But, so you're going to have my amp hopefully 10, 20, 30 years from now, and you're going to go buy tubes, and the guy's going to tell you modern tubes won't run those voltages anymore. Because that's where we already are with, Marshall Majors, the one we had in here. We had to try a new tube, a brand new iteration of a tube we hadn't seen before to make it work, because it just I almost went totally Missouri redneck. It done blowed up everything. I mean, it'll just smoke modern tubes. I mean, they last maybe 8 minutes. And poof, flashbulb. Looked like your old Marilyn Monroe photo shoot, everywhere. So we had to put KT120s in it, which that amp had 630 volts on the plate. And the transformer was as big as the Mac we're looking at. It was crazy. So with this kind of design, it doesn't sacrifice any performance. The only thing that is less is the volume. And because here's where it went wrong. 25 guys I've seen have made a low voltage EL34 amp. And the result was always, well, it's quieter, but it doesn't sound as good. Because none of those guys upped the current. They just said, let's just cut the voltage. And go Google Ohm's law right now. It's pretty simple. And one of the laws, the reason they call it a law is because it's not theory, it's not speculation, it's a law. It is a law of physics. Not like a law that you can only drive 35 miles an hour out here on the street. It's a law of physics that in order to get the same result, you have to raise current when you lower voltage. There's a reciprocal relationship.
If you want a given amount of wattage, every wattage, current, voltage all stay in a certain relationship. It's like on the back of your amp. If you look on the back of a US amp at the AC fuse, if it's a 3 amp fuse here where it runs 120 volts, It's not a 3 amp fuse for you folks in Norway,
Right.
where you're running 250 volts.
It's a 2 amp.
It's
fuse.
half as and it could be half as much. It could be a 1.5 amp fuse, but
Right.
they typically use a 2 amp fuse just because
It's easy.
it's easy.
That's the one that's on the shelf.
Yeah.
But so it's a law like gravity. That's the way electricity works. It's not it's not a design choice. It's not a stylistic thing. It's the law of physics. So I matched the law of physics with these transformers and then overdid it a little bit just to give it some breathing room so the transformers didn't get stressed. So now when you run like a producer, the tubes, you can touch them. You can't hold them. It'll burn you a little bit. You can touch them. I mean, you can sit there and go, like, oh yeah, that's getting warm. If you were to touch a 100-watt Marshall for half a second, you'd have a second.
No fingerprint.
Yeah, you'd have a second-degree burn on your skin. Now the transformers barely get warm. I mean, because it's current. It's not pressure. There's no pressure on all this stuff. It's breathing. All this current flowing through there with low pressure. Transformers don't get hot at all. You can sit there and just hold the power transformer endlessly. It doesn't even get uncomfortable.
And there's so much surface area because the stack is so big.
Yeah. But you could fry an egg on a Marshall 100-watt transformer after 2
I want to
years.
kind of jump in Tony Connolly, who's one of my favorite writers and
Yeah, Tony's great. If you guys don't
photographers
follow Tony online, check him out. He writes a lot of interesting stuff.
But Tony was asking if any other amp builders are following your new take on tube amp design, or are you still ahead of the curve with your thinking? And I'm going to let Dan elaborate on this for a minute, but Dan appreciates amps from just about anybody. If something's well done and if it doesn't follow his particular
I'm not the oracle of all that's good and true.
Right.
I'm not.
He still appreciates it, but
I love. There's a few boutique amp guys. I love their.
But he doesn't basically look at what's out there. I don't think he'd be aware of whether there's other people doing some of what he's doing or not. I think some people are getting involved with his master voltage feature on an amp.
I intentionally keep the blinders on so that I don't read the magazines. And I've heard, when I go to trade shows, I'll hear other amps go, "Wow, that sounds really good," but I don't know what it is or what it's doing. I don't care. Hey, Chell, greetings to Sweden. So it's there might be somebody developing stuff right now. If there are, I'm not aware of any of the products. The way I usually find out about this is I'll get an email from someone going, "Hey, this guy's copying what you do." And there are a couple of boutique amp makers now that, we had an original formula with the London. I use these kind of components on the plate and these on the cathodes and these for coupling caps, and I keep this certain kind of relationship on the screen grids on our amps that are unique. And there's two people in particular that really took note. And I'm flattered by it. I don't care, but the people have sent me pictures inside their amp, and I go, "Wow, that looks really familiar." But I make no claims to being an inventor at all. I didn't invent anything. It's more of a recipe. So if you end up making chicken and noodles like Wolfgang Puck, it doesn't mean you're copying Wolfgang Puck. It just means it tastes good and you like it. So it's all good.
There's also no way to do this economically in a budget way. You can make amps that have
corners to cut.
Yeah, you can have amps that are lower voltage and higher current, but you better have very high grade transformers and capacitors and
you can't use cheap steel to do high current stuff.
It just doesn't happen. So if you see an amp that is supposed to do, say, what a producer does, but it's $14.99, you might not be real impressed.
Yeah, I take great pride that we don't have our amps made by slaves. That's a cost as well, and cost of doing business in California. Trying to copy Dan's hairstyle. I'm getting a haircut this week, by the way. But Josh, I just have to reiterate how much I love that you're here on the show every week. Because Josh always, and he hasn't even started getting vulgar yet. I mean, when this guy goes low, it's good. But So the 6L6s we're using, Bill, are a special run from which factory, Shaguan or something? They're Chinese, believe it or not, but they're called an STR, which is a special tube
request.
Special tube request. And I gave every tube on the market a fair share, and at this low a voltage, the sort of restriction of Chinese tubes are really second rate kind of doesn't apply, because the reason Chinese tubes are usually second rate is they don't take any voltage and they degrade really fast. But at low voltage, high current, and these are the highest end Chinese tubes I think that you can get. We tried the sort of standard off the shelf Chinese ones, and they just didn't sound very good. But I tried the JJs, the Svetlanas, the Wing Cs, the Electroharmonics, and somebody else, now I can't remember. And the way we do it is Mike will change the tubes and not tell me, because he thinks I'm prejudiced. Not, he thinks I'm prejudiced towards certain manufacturers. And so he won't let me see what he's putting in it. He goes, just tell me what you like. And we go, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And then I narrow down, okay, 2, 3, and 5 are really good. Okay, let's go back through. And I always know it's going to be something funny, because he starts giggling when he knows. He goes, you hate these tubes. And I know, I like it. It sounds good. What is it? And he goes, it's a Chinese tube. And I went, well, fair's fair. My experience to date with Chinese tubes has been horrible. And we stress tested these and beat the shit out of them. And they're fine. At low voltage, they sound great. They sound the most vintage out of anything we found. And again, it is, they're not even cheap. They're as expensive as all the European tubes, because they're a special run. But yeah, it's cool. So there's a question coming back earlier that I want to answer really quick. And we got talking. And it was Gibson Guitar Guy. And he said, I have a producer. I love it, but I want a little combo. Which low powered one would you recommend for straight ahead rock? Joe Walsh, the Cars, etc. I mean, we got 3 things that would fall into that category. The lowest power thing we make is the little Elvis, but all of our amps have that master voltage control on it. So you can turn any of our amps into a 4-watt amp if you want. But depends on your budget too, Gibson Guitar Guy. The Redline stuff, the London Pro and the Ventura are great sounding amps. And they're really the same exact amp as ours, except for using machine wound transformers. They're still handmade here in the shop, and our transformers for those come from Chicago. And they're machine wound instead of hand wound. So, if you want to talk to me on the side, I can walk you through the whole process. But depends on how much you want to spend. The most affordable one is the Ventura. And it's a great little rock amp. Great country amp, too.
Which also has amazing cleans, even though...
Yeah, no, it's really good clean sound. No, I mean, it's not that I dislike clean. It's just not my priority.
Yeah, the thing with the Ventura, with the pentode front end, it loves pedals. And to me, if an amp can do great cleans, I can make a 15-channel amp just by using various pedals. And if I get tired of one of them, change the pedal.
Well, Ventura has 4 voices.
But when Dan and Mike first came out with Mr. Belvedere, that was its,
Mike named it.
That was its code name, and Mike had a little picture off the internet of Mr. Belvedere from the old TV series. And when they were first playing that on the clean side, I went to Dan and I said, I want one of those. I'll get in line for one right now. Unfortunately, but unfortunately, I'm not a 65 employee, but I'm still part of the 65 family indirectly, which means I come at the end of the line behind all customers, all dealers,
Let's shoot for Christmas.
Christmas of 2014.
No, Christmas.
Well,
Christmas, Hanukkah.
It's
on the 7th day of Hanukkah, my true love gave.
But I mean, that's an amp that was one of the first in the lower voltage, kind of higher current.
Yeah, it's not as extreme as a producer, but it's reduced voltage and increased current.
But very, very versatile amp, great grab and go.
Well, Netcom asks a good question. Can you talk about how wattage factors into your water hose analogy? Well, there's lower dissipation with less pressure on the tube. So,
You're not putting out 50 watts, 50 or 60 watts
Right.
in a producer, as an example.
No, it's 28 watts. Because of the lower pressure on the tube, the dissipation is less. The thing about volume is there's a lot of myths, or I'm trying to be diplomatic. There's a lot of things marketing has taught people to believe. One of which is you need a 100-watt amp. And I've had a lot of...
100 watt amp is twice as loud as a 50 watt amp.
Yeah, which is complete horseshit. But I have a lot of customers initially come in and go, look, I play clean and I play through a 100-watt amp, and that's what I have to have. I go, okay, that's fine. And I go look at their rig, and the master volume's on 2. So, well, why do you need a 100-watt amp? You're playing a 15-watt amp here.
Or they have speakers that are 93.6 dB efficiency instead of 100
really
dB.
inefficient speakers, exactly. And well, no, but it's a 100-watt amp. It's got 4 tubes and it sounds good. I'm like, well, okay, why don't you just plug into this and let me know what you think? And most of the time they go, wow, I didn't know a 20 or 30 or 18 or 12-watt amp could sound that big. I'm like, yeah, if it's made really efficiently, it's louder than hell if it's done right.
And if you have good iron and the amp's articulate,
You got to have good
defined,
transformers and good caps and
Yeah.
good electrolytics and the whole deal. How about making a little producer and make it 12 watts? Well, Bill, you can take a producer and dial it down to 12 watts with EL34s. But you mean so I can make it less expensive? I think I'm going to actually do a red line producer next year. This is a great question. This is Frank Schaudifer. Says, where are they going wrong in the modern tube manufacturing process? Cathode, vacuum, not washing after the restroom, etc. All of those.
All of those.
Plus more. Well, the way it was explained to me, when I first started the company, I was really struggling with the EF86. We had to come up with a different way to treat that tube to make it usable. And there was a guy, Derek, at Watford Valves in England. I'm not sure if they're still around or not. I sure hope they are. I hope they are, because Derek was extremely helpful. And he hooked me up with an engineer that worked at Mullard, or as they say, Mullard, at the Blackburn factory. And what he told me was the advantage that they felt Mullard had over the other tube manufacturers was they had a unique process for making their cathodes. And they did them in a clay oven, and they always built 2 clay ovens. So they would cook a batch of cathode in this clay brick oven, and it would be perfectly clear, perfectly clean, beautiful clean cathode material, no impurities whatsoever. And then they would immediately smash that oven and destroy it. That's why they built 2. So then they'd make the next batch in the second oven, and while they were making that batch, they had a crew building another oven right here. And when the second batch was finished, they would destroy that oven and go to this new oven that the crew had built in a week. And they just went back and forth like that. So they had this facility with 2 huge clay brick ovens that were constantly being refreshed. So, and the reason why is, when you cook cathode material at God knows what.
4,000 degrees.
Yeah, at 451 Vonnegut temperatures. And then when it cools off, there's a carbon residue in the oven. And even if you go in and clean it and scrub it, scientists with great materials and spacesuits cleaning the thing, there's a residue of the soap and still some carbon in there. They could never get it completely pure.
If you look buried somewhere on my guitar amplifier blueprinting website in the groove tubes data, I have photos that I took of the tube making equipment when they were doing the 6L6GE. There are some pictures of the hydrogen ovens that were used over there, 4,000 degree ovens. But if you want a picture later on to go along with Dan's explanation.
So that was one of the elements. So one of the biggest factors in a tube degrading quickly is cathode stripping. And when that cathode is not pure, if you know how a tube works, I'm assuming you guys know, in a nutshell, the filaments heat up the cathode to a point to when you get a positive draw on the other side of the tube that tiny atoms fly off the cathode. It actually is disintegrating as you're using it, but it's really, really slow. And if that cathode material, that the negative side of the tube is covered with, has any impurities in it, that also goes through your grids, which is, creates your sound. And it hits the grid and it makes noise. You hear tubes that starts popping, doing that stuff. Those are impurities coming out of the cathode material and hitting the grids. So Mullard's whole thing was they made really, really nice cathodes. And that's why they sound the way they do. That's also why they last so long, because they don't have to roast that tube to get enough signal out of it. The cathode's so clean and so pure that it just lasts a long time. The other thing Eric Yar brings up here too is, and I know you have some data about vacuum, which I think is really interesting, and we'll get to that in a second. But the tooling, these are old school machines. They're not digitally controlled, computerized, CNC type quality machines. They're manual machines, with belts and conveyors and geese on a conveyor belt and squirrels running up a ladder and, Oompa Loompas underneath rowing. It's old gear. And the tolerances go away after time. And since tubes aren't state-of-the-art stuff anymore, no one's retooled. Like most of the guys making tubes now are making tubes on, the newest machine would be 30 years old? Early 80s maybe?
Yeah, well, even they were still using the original tooling. It's like the tooling that we had
so
for the
6L6.
6L6 was older than I was.
Yeah, but most of it is 50 to 60-year-old tooling, and the tolerances go away after time. And then the vacuum, and I had an interesting conversation with you, Miles, about this once. The size of machine they used to use to pump a vacuum. And the vacuum has as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, has a direct reaction on how the process is going to work inside the tube. If there's any air in the tube at all, it impedes the ability of the cathode to release pure stuff over to the
And
other
there's
side
also
of the tube.
impurities in there. But, basically, one of the things that takes the longest in making the tube is pumping down, evacuating the tube from of the air that was in the tube. And typically use a vane diffusion pump. Kind of like one of these old Judson superchargers or Paxton superchargers on Studebakers and stuff from the 50s and 60s. It's a big vane pump. And these run for many, many minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, to pump the tube down, get the vacuum level of the inside of the tube down to a certain level. European tubes typically had a softer vacuum than American tubes. Old groove tubes had a rating of like S4, which meant soft 4, as opposed to H4, which was hard 4. They ended up getting rid of that H and S rating many years ago, but basically an EL34 has a much softer vacuum than a 6L6. That's also one of the reasons that it has about a 3,000 hour average life as opposed to the 6L6 with 6,000 hours. In any case, it takes a certain amount of time to pump these tubes down. What happened over at GT is they would pump the tubes down on the prototypes to a certain level using the diffusion, the vane pump. But then they had another pump. They would turn off a valve and take that evacuation line and run it through something called a turbomolecular pump that would actually take the vacuum down much more closely to an absolute level. And I took some of the first versions of a 6L6 GE before that production went to China. I put them in a box that would run the tubes at very high voltage, very high current.
Not to interrupt you, but David Hayes just logged on, another great amp builder on the East Coast.
Oh, hey, David. And yeah, talk about clean sounds.
Yeah.
But I ran the prototypes of the 6L6 GE before I went to work, actually, for GT, for thousands of hours and measured the degradation. And then at one point, after I had been at GT for a couple years, I told Aspen that test was still running, that test ran on a piece of test gear 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it was still running, and he asked for the tube, if he could have the tubes back, and I said, no, but I'll bring in the test gear and we'll continue to let it run. And those tubes with a much higher vacuum lasted, I mean, I I quit at about 8 or 10,000 hours and just shut the thing down. But yeah, the vacuum's important. The impurities, the lack of impurities is really important because under voltage, those get gasified and they end up contaminating the tube. And again, lower voltage will cause those impurities to gasify less, or some of them might not even burn at those lower